Yo guys, what is up? Moxie in our Path of Exile 2 video, and today I just kind of wanted to talk about a quick Theorycraft that I've been working on for a Bleed Huntress Amazon build that is stacking accuracy and synergizing crit with Bleed and some of the new skills. Now, recently, up until basically today, we really didn't have that much information about the Amazon skills, and at the time of recording this, I'm still waiting for patch notes. However, a YouTuber by the name of Ziggy D, who I actually got to work with for Borderlands 3 stuff, is been very closely connected with GGG and has now had the privilege of getting to play the Huntress, and he put out a video going over all of their skills. I'll have a link to his video down in the description, but I was able to grab some screenshots from his video and start putting together the pieces of an idea of a build. Now, once again, this is a Theorycraft. There's still, so many support gems and skills and uniques and so many things that we don't know. But just from what we have, I'm starting to get pretty excited about the potential of a Bleed Amazon build. And so I wanted to kind of break down some of the things that I think are cool that could work really well together. Once again, this is not a build guide, just some cool ideas that I wanted to share with y'all. Hope you guys enjoy. Let's get right into it. Real quick, the patch notes just came out, so I wanted to make a quick little addition to the video. The patch notes don't really change much of the things that we were talking about, because everything that we were talking about was basically new. But they're adding a new keystone passive that looks insane. It's called Crimson Assault. This Crimson Assault keystone passive will be to the southeast of the Ranger and the Huntress's starting location. Crimson Assault causes bleeding you inflict to be aggravated and the base bleeding duration to be 1 second. Now, inherently, bleed does its damage over 5 seconds. Aggravated bleed makes bleed deal 100% increased damage. So we're going to have our bleeds dealing more damage. And it says that base bleeding duration is 1 second. If this works how I'm hoping it works, it means that our bleed will cause its damage over its damage over 1 second instead of 5 seconds. So we're still dealing the same amount of damage, but the damage is going to be happening way faster. This would be a massive damage increase to bleed, and allow you to get way better bossing and single target on bleed, because you could constantly be reapplying those bleeds. Rather than having to wait 5 seconds to cause another bleed. And your bleeds would be dealing 100% increased damage. And so this is looking incredibly spicy for bleed builds. It could be that your bleed only ticks once, where it would tick 5 times, but I just don't see that being the case. They're not saying anything about changing the damage of bleed, just that the duration is 1 second, which would be a massive... While it doesn't change the damage that it does, it is a DPS increase for bleed, and could be really, really great for us. So one of the skills that I was not anticipating being excited for, but actually looks really cool, is Spearfield. Now, we got to see some gameplay from Ziggy D's video, and it looks like it could be a skill that works both well for mobbing and bossing, which means that it could be something that really is worthwhile to invest into. For mobbing, you'd magnified effect to give it that increased area, as it already has a pretty good AoE, but you could also use it with concentrated effect to stack more spears on a single target. Now, what Spearfield does is when you click it, you stab the ground, which causes tons of spears to go out in front of you, and then those spears last a default of 5 seconds, and you can have 70 spears active at a time. Whenever an enemy touches them or they expire, they explode, which damages them and maims them. Maim is a status debuff that makes enemies move slower. And so one thing that's important to know and understand with bleed is when enemies are moving, they take more bleed damage. And so if an enemy is maimed, they're going to be moving slower. That doesn't mean that they take less bleed. It just means that in order to get from one place to another, they're going to be moving for longer. So this does already have innate synergies with bleed. Now, the thing that's really cool about Spearfield is, one, it's going to have a new tag, which is called a hazard. And I think there's going to be a lot of cool ways to scale hazard things, specifically around a stat called rearming, which allows our spears, after they detonate and into an enemy, to basically reappear or re-hit that enemy. with a high chance to rearm. You could have some pretty good single target from a single cast. But I'd be very interested in this thing as a way to apply bleeds in a large area. We could probably get a 100% bleed chance with some gems and our skill tree later on, but early we could use Lacerate. Supported skills have a 50% chance to inflict bleeding with all of those spears. Could be real nice. And then Brutality to give it more physical damage and deal no chaos or elemental damage. This is just kind of early on, just support Spirit Field, and like we use like Magnified Effect to give it more area. Now, to pair with that, there's actually a new skill also on the Amazon or Huntress called Whirling Slash. Now, this Whirling Slash looks like it's more of a combo attack or a combo builder than something that will actually deal damage itself. In a lot of the videos, they show off using like twisters to shoot through the Whirling Slash to create a bunch of twisters. But basically, this is an AoE melee attack that creates a whirlwind around you, which slows enemies and blinds them. Huntress is going to be like mainly evasion based, so blind is a pretty good effect to have. And then when you leave the area, it collapses the storm, dealing damage and causing knockback. Note that knockback is actually going to be something that can be really helpful for this build, as if you knock an enemy back in a spear field, they're just going to be taking more damage from all of those spears. Now, the thing that really interests me is Hemocrystals. Hemocrystals as a support gem for Whirling Slash. This says that it supports attack skills which you use yourself, which can cause damaging hits, which Whirling Slash can do. And supported skills consume bleed on hit to create explosive, blood-filled crystals, but cannot themselves inflict bleed. So Whirling Slash could not inflict bleed itself, but it'll allow all of our bleeds that we are attacking or attaching to an enemy to then get turned into crystals that explode. Whenever we consume a bleed, we're going to get 4 hemocrystals, and those 4 hemocrystals do like basically 8% of the expected bleed. So if one hit is creating 4, we're getting 32% of our bleed for the hemocrystals that are created, which sounds not great, but when you kind of think about it, bleeds can only be applied to one enemy. So for mobbing, now we've got bleed that is less, but now it's going to hit in an AoE. So it's going to be able to spread bleeds and make our bleeds hit more things. But it also has really impactful implications for bossing. Now, one thing that I hate about dots in Path of Exile 2 is that once you apply a dot to an enemy, hitting them again with the same skill that applies that dot doesn't actually make the dot deal more damage. It just reapplies the dot. So that's why you saw things like that like Hammer of the Gods skill being so good for bleed, because it only needed to hit once. You only want to really have to hit once with bleed skills, because hitting again doesn't give you more bleed, it just reapplies it. So what Hemocrystals allows us to do is actually use bleed for bossing. And to explain that, if we are spamming spears into a boss, and at the same time we have a whirlwind around us, and all of those spear stabs are constantly creating bleeds, but all of those Whirling Slash spins are going to be consuming those bleeds, causing them to deal an explosion, instead of now basically not benefiting from bleed after our initial bleed, now all of those hits from all of those spears are then going to be constantly creating bleed explosions, and we can turn bleed from a very mediocre single target skill from multiple hits to like potentially an actual bossing skill, because all of those hits from all of those spears will constantly be able to deal AoE damage on a boss, potentially shotgunning them, but allowing us to constantly keep applying new bleeds and constantly keeping damage from that. And we're using Whirling Slash because as long as we're in Whirling Slash, it's just going to keep spinning around us. And so it could keep spinning and consuming the bleeds while we're spamming spears, which will keep creating bleeds. And I think this combo for single target could be really interesting. Now, to pair with that, we've got a few new things, some of the things that we need to find out more information on. But over here, we've got a skill called Rake. Now, Rake is basically a dash ability that you get 100% more magnitude or bleeding inflicted, deals up to 100% more damage based on the distance traveled, and inflicts bleeding on hit. Basically, this will dash to an enemy and bleed them, and I'm thinking this could be used, while you could use it for damage, the AoE on it looks not great, and the damage doesn't look that great either. But I was thinking of this being basically as our engage skill. So you would dash into a pack, spear them, dash into the next pack, spear, dash, spear, And every time that you're hitting an enemy with this, it's going to dash you, but it's also going to inflict bleeds, which is going to start our bleed chains. And bleed chains are going to be important because of the new skill, Herald of Blood. Herald of Blood works like the other heralds, but it basically is going to be causing explosions based off of enemies' bleed. And Rake in of itself is going to be bleeding. Spears are going to be bleeding. But this basically deals 15% of an exploded enemy's blood loss as fizz damage nearby. And it also has a chance to aggravate bleeding. So if we're casting all of our spears and those enemies are bleeding and they die, they're going to be like aggravating the bleeding on nearby enemies and also causing explosions for more AoE damage. Not something that would really do anything for a single target, but for mobbing, it's going to make bleed, I think, feel a whole lot better. And then we could also put things, I'm not sure where I would put it on Whirling Slash or on Rake, but we could put Bludgeon as well, which supports skills that knock enemies back, or support skills and they make them knock back. So if we have all of our spears down, we could just Rake for more bleed, but also knock them into more spears. Could be really interesting. Now, then let's talk about Ascendancies, and we'll talk about some weird things as well. But there's also, we don't have much information about them, but there's also Bloodhound's Mark, which obviously looks like something that is going to allow us to get more single target on enemies for bleeding. And there's also Blood Hunt, which basically detonates bleed on enemies. And so this, for single targets, could also be used as a combo finisher. Now, the reason we're going to be going Amazon, one, she's new and she looks awesome. But there's specific synergies with Amazon's nodes for Penetrate, Crit Strike. Both of these, Crit Strike's the first thing that you get is chance to hit with attacks can exceed 100%. You gain additional crit chance equal to 25% of excess chance to hit with attacks. If you did not know, bleed scales off of how much you deal with the hit. And so if we are critting, we're going to be dealing more damage with the hit, and hence our bleeds will deal more damage. They revealed spears today have a 5% base crit chance, and so inherently getting bleed to work with those skills with crit is going to be difficult unless you take something like this, which is going to allow us to stack up a bunch of accuracy to get a bunch more crit chance. And they've confirmed that this is base crit chance, meaning that all of your other percentage increases will scale with this node. The other thing that's awesome is Penetrate. Attacks using your weapons have added fizz damage equal to 25% of the accuracy rating on the weapon. Now, we don't know how much accuracy rating can roll on spears, but on bows, for example, this is 200 added flat damage on a T1 roll. Bleed scales with fizz damage, so getting more fizz damage on our weapons, or getting more fizz damage in general, is massive for bleed. So we've got these two big nodes, and there's also a skill tree node or two for Perfectly Placed Knife, which gives us 30% increased crit chance against bleeding enemies and 20% chance to aggravate bleeding on targets we crit. And the Bleeding Out node gives us plus 250 to accuracy against bleeding enemies and bleeds that we inflict deal damage 10% faster. I think both of these would be really interesting. We're also pretty close to the Struck Through node, which gives us our attacks have a +1 base to crit chance. +1 base on crit chance is massive. Specifically because the spears are 5%. If the spears had 20% base +1 to bring it to 21, not that big of a deal, but going from 5% to 6% could be really nice. It depends on how much crit chance we get from the Crit Strikes node. If this is a ton of base, this probably isn't needed, but it could be really nice. Now, in terms of accuracy stacking, there's a lot of things that we could do, and there's a lot of items. There's probably more uniques as well, but I just made like a example copy of a ring. This is a emerald ring, which rolls implicitly with flat accuracy, and then can also roll accuracy as a prefix. So a ring like this could have accuracy, added fizz, more accuracy, max life, dex, and resistances, and getting like two of these, or two rings that have like double rolled accuracies, would really help with our accuracy stacking. And the other thing that I thought was interesting is we're going to be doing a lot of fizz damage. And there are unique boots in the game right now called the Lizard Scale boots, which give us all physical damages pinning, which means that all of our hits with all of these abilities would make enemies immobilized. Enemies that are pinned count as immobilized. We'd be building a crit build. And then there's a leverage support that supported skills have 50% increased crit chance against immobilized enemies, which could then even lean in more into our like our bleed and pin and immobilize, we could put that on Spear Field, and then all of a sudden Spear Field is going to be all of its damage is going to be pinning, and it's going to give itself 50% increased crit chance. This is not more, just pointing that out, but 50% increased crit chance against those enemies could be really nice. Guys, that's going to do it for the video. I hope you enjoyed. I'll be making a similar video for like lightning spear Amazon, because that also looks really cool to me. And this is obviously a very early Theorycraft. We don't have patch notes. We don't know all the uniques. We don't know all the supports. We don't know any of the new skill tree changes and so much more. But I just kind of wanted to throw my ideas out there because I'm getting pretty excited for Bleed, where I was not excited for Bleed before. So you guys, I will catch y'all on the next one. Take care. Peace.